Samsung has just announced the Galaxy S20 Ultra, and it's an absolute mammoth of a smartphone. We're talking 16 gigs of RAM and a camera with 100 times zoom. It's not just better than any flagship phone they've ever released before, it is a tier above. You could almost call it a super phone. So today, we're answering the big question: does the Galaxy S20 Ultra destroy the iPhone 11 Pro Max? I think the results might surprise you. The first thing you'll notice, putting both these two devices side by side, is the Ultra is an absolute unit of a phone. It's massive. For most people's hands, the iPhone 11 Pro Max is a large device, but Samsung takes that and then adds about 5% more height and almost 10% more thickness. To be honest though, I don't think that in itself is a problem. It's large enough that you can forget about it being a one-handed experience, but as long as you go in with that as an expectation, you'll spend more time gawping at the magnificent display you get than worrying about how you're going to hold it. But more on that in a minute. What is weird though is that even though Samsung's phone towers above Apple's in size, it's actually lighter, and I'm going to be honest, feels a little bit cheaper. While Samsung has actually upgraded the metal they use in their phone rim from 7000 series aluminium to something that's now 1.2 times stronger, Apple uses stainless steel, which has many times the mechanical strength of aluminium anyways. It'll be far more resistant to dents and scratches. Plus, I just like the density of the material. The iPhone's weight just makes it feel a touch more premium. And whilst it is a little early for me to try it myself, if we dropped both phones on their sides, my money would be on the iPhone surviving with far less damage. That said though, whilst it only feels okay, I think the S20 Ultra looks fantastic. Compared to the standard S20, which visually looks not too distinct from the company's own mid-range phones, this beefy camera module makes the Ultra look, well, badass. When you're holding it, you feel like you're holding cutting-edge technology. I love that idea, but I will say that the design is a little shouty compared to the iPhone. It's got an enormous camera module with text just to highlight its new space zoom feature, but the iPhone is a little more understated, classier. Its matte finish gets instant plus points from me because of its ability to resist fingerprints and avoid that kind of stickiness you can sometimes get with glass. Samsung's camera module is protected by Gorilla Glass 6, but its sheer size means that it's gonna cause major wobble if you put the phone on a flat surface. Oh yeah, and both phones have IP68 water and dust resistance ratings, and neither has a headphone jack. Slight bummer, yeah, but wireless is where we're headed. I think having a headphone jack on a mainstream flagship 2020 smartphone is gonna be a rarity anyways. So, design and build-wise, I would slightly side with Apple, but now is where the tables start to turn. By the way, I'm launching a pretty massive giveaway starting today of 1 Galaxy S20 Ultra and 4 Galaxy S20s. It's free and international, and all rules are going to be in the description. I'm going to say it now. The display on the Galaxy S20 Ultra is the best display on a smartphone, period. I could just leave it at that, but it is better than the iPhones in so many ways that I think we should talk about it. For starters, what they have in common is that both use OLED technology for deep contrast, and they both have an almost identical brightness of 800 nits across the whole display. But then, well, the S20 Ultra's panel is just colossal in size. We say that every single year because somehow each generation these screens just keep getting bigger, and this time round you're looking at a whopping 6.9 inches. That might not sound like a big jump versus the 6.5-inch iPhone screen, but in terms of screen area, that's a difference you'll feel. Samsung's tiny hole-punch camera, which is 40% smaller than past generations, combined with tiny bezels all the way around, means that the Ultra feels almost borderless and futuristic compared to Apple's large notch and thick black rim. Now, back when the iPhone X came out, which is the first time we saw Apple use this front design, we thought it looked slick and futuristic, because fair enough, up against the Galaxy S8 that was Samsung's equivalent at the time, it was. But since then, whilst Apple is using the same design, Samsung's has come so far. And to put a number on it, the S20 Ultra's screen-to-body ratio sits at around 90%, versus Apple's approximately 84%. What is interesting though, speaking of borders, is that the S20 lineup is the first time Samsung has backtracked on curved displays. Compared to the S10 and other previous flagships, these new displays look almost flat. There's still a slight curve, which is more than you can say for the iPhone, but it's nowhere near as dramatic as before. I'd say it's fair enough. The curves didn't really have any functional benefit, and I don't think there'll be that many people that miss them. There is more to this Ultra's display though. It's a Quad HD Plus panel, giving it around 30% more pixels than the iPhone's display, but the best bit is that its refresh rate is double. Whilst the 11 Pro's panel refreshes at a pretty normal 60 times per second, Samsung's does 120, and it changes things. You know how Apple has always had this reputation for buttery smoothness that its Android rivals just haven't been able to replicate. Well, the S20 completely reversed that trend for me. Using both side by side, for the first time, Samsung felt like the more fluid experience. And it's not just that Samsung's display refreshes twice as fast, but it also has twice the touch response rate. That means that it's faster at registering your touches, which makes everything just feel more instant and responsive. I should clarify here, the display on the iPhone 11 Pro Max is top shelf, but the display on the Ultra is unlike anything I've ever seen before. Now, I mentioned Apple's sizable notch, and so while we're here, it's worth noting that it's not there for show. It has all the sensors needed for Face ID, which, if you've never used it, works incredibly, and if you have, you'll know what I mean. Just by scanning your face, Face ID is secure enough to make bank transactions, autofill your passwords, and so on. Samsung's face scanner is fast, but it only uses a 2D camera, so it's more of a tool for convenience than it is a safety measure. The phone does, though, have an ultrasonic fingerprint scanner, pretty much the same as the one seen on the Note 10 last year. Now, just before we get to cameras, which is arguably the main event of this new S20 Ultra, there is something else I always like to keep track of with new phones: processing power. And whilst there are a lot of different variables at play here, the main takeaway is that both are kind of on par. Depending on your region, Samsung uses either the Exynos 990 or the Snapdragon 865 chipset. So, versus last year's S10, that's around a 15% faster CPU, a 25% faster GPU, and an AI engine that's at least twice as good. But that actually puts it slightly behind the A13 Bionic chip in the iPhone. There will be some tasks the Samsung does better, but for most games and apps, I'd expect them to run a tiny bit faster on iPhone. Samsung does kind of make up for this though, with an absolutely absurd amount of RAM, 12 gigabytes on the base model and up to 16 gigs. And when you factor in that this is the fastest RAM we've ever seen on a phone, the performance ceiling here is sky high. The iPhone, by comparison, only has 4 gigs, so Samsung will definitely have an edge when you're juggling heavy tasks. But just bear in mind that because iOS is optimized to not need as much RAM, the difference won't be as noticeable as it sounds on paper. I've tried opening apps, flicking between them, and there is a tangible difference between the performance of this S20 Ultra and even Samsung's phones from just a few months ago. But something I actually noticed even more was just how fantastic the haptics are here. The Ultra uses the same vibration motors as the Galaxy Note 10 Plus before it, but it's been further tuned to offer what I'm going to say is the most satisfying physical response to touches you've seen on a phone. I really would recommend you go into a store, you try the phone, because I would rank it above Apple in this aspect. Okay then, it's no secret that the camera is a very important part of the S20 Ultra's proposition. I mean, this is quite possibly the largest camera module I've ever seen. So, to start with, side by side, looking at specs, Samsung's camera makes the iPhones look a bit like a toy. But we have to be careful here, because the specs can be a little bit misleading. Its main camera has a 108 megapixel resolution versus 12 on the iPhone. It has a 48 megapixel telephoto camera with support for 100 times space zoom versus the iPhone's max of 10 times zoom. The ultra-wide cameras then are almost identically spec'd, with both having a wide 120-degree field of view. But on top of that, Samsung has an additional depth vision sensor, which the iPhone doesn't. So, on paper, this kind of gives you the impression that these two phones are in completely different leagues, like they're not even comparable. And that is kind of the case, but also not really. So, that main camera, 108 megapixels, you can take 108 megapixel photos, but most of the time you probably won't. The benefit comes mainly because of something called pixel binning. There's quite a few phones out there that can do this. They merge 4 smaller pixels into one bigger one to make those resulting pixels cleaner and more noise-free. Well, the S20 Ultra uses something called nona binning, converting not 4, but 9 pixels into one. And so, whilst you do still end up with a 12 megapixel photo from this 108 megapixel camera, the size of those pixels and the resulting quality is 3 times greater than the iPhone. So, Samsung's 12 megapixel photos have an incredibly crisp finish, and this translates to its night mode too. When you take a night mode shot now, you can hold your phone still for 8 seconds and capture way more light than you're used to with a Samsung. Apple's night mode is really good, but Samsung's is now better, in my opinion. For the first time, you can actually record 8K video at a proper frame rate. It's only 24 frames per second, which means you'll definitely benefit from sticking it on a tripod when capturing. But just the fact that you can shoot 8K video is staggering. 8K is 4 times the resolution of 4K. And to give you some idea, this shot right here is a still image taken from an 8K video shot on this phone. And just this screen grab alone is a 33 megapixel image in its own right that you can then zoom all the way into. Aside from from the low frame rate though, this 8K footage also takes quite a long time to render on these new phones before you can watch it back in 8K, so it might not be a feature you keep on. What about that zoom though? 100 times? That sounds almost unbelievable, and it kind of is. The numbers don't tell the full story. See, in my briefing, Samsung only talked about their hybrid zoom capabilities. Not once did they actually disclose the actual optical zoom value of the camera, which is the figure we usually use to compare phones. They say the phone can losslessly zoom in 10 times, but from what I can see, the actual optical zoom range is only about 4 to 5 times. That's still impressive, mind you, and certainly dwarfs the iPhone's 2 times zoom, but it does mean that if you were going to try zooming in 100 times, like it suggests doing right on the back of the phone, most of that zoom is digital, and the end result is just not going to be all that sharp. And then you got the ultra-wide, which has seen some small but important improvements. The field of view is now actually slightly smaller than past Samsung phones, but has the benefit of almost none of that weird distorting fisheye effect that we're used to seeing on ultra-wide cameras. And switching between the lenses on Samsung's phone no longer feels like switching between lenses, which is something the iPhone has done really well from the start. So as far as the user is concerned, using these cameras on both phones just feels like using one camera, but one with a whole load of options, and that's how it should be. Samsung's fourth additional sensor is just a depth camera, meaning that when you take a portrait mode shot, for example, you're just getting a bit more information about how far away your background is. The phone also has a 40 megapixel selfie camera versus Apple's 12. They're both very good, and I should say at this point, when it comes to cameras, the battle is not one with hardware, it's one with software, and Samsung's camera software is catching up rapidly with Apple's, but at the same time, their hardware has just leapfrogged Apple's. For Samsung, that is a great position to be in. And speaking of software, obviously with either of these two phones, you're buying into a completely different smartphone ecosystem. Of course, Android versus iOS in itself, that could be an entire video, but there's a couple of things worth noting with this comparison in particular. Samsung's phone ships with Android 10 combined with their One UI 2.1 skin, and this delivers quick share. It's one-touch sharing between Samsung phones and tablets. Finally, an Android equivalent to Apple's AirDrop. There are a couple of other smaller things, like how Samsung has increased the vibrance of their icons, but largely not a huge shift from the software you'd find on the Note 10 last year. The iPhone 11 Pro Max looks like an iPhone, and that's either a great thing for you or not such a great thing. You'll benefit from a lot of iOS's traditional advantages, like getting a lot of games and apps a little early. You're generally getting less bloatware on the phone compared to the Samsung, which comes with a whole suite of apps you'll probably never touch. And iPhones have fantastic integration with Macs, if you're a Mac user. Plus, what you lose in the lack of customization, you gain in software support. The very nature of Apple only releasing a few phones per year means that they can really focus on delivering updates. You can expect a new iPhone to stay up to date for around 5 years after launch, whereas I'd only give the S20 Ultra about 2. Now, just before we conclude here, there's a couple of things I want to touch on. Firstly, that I love the fact that companies are finally paying attention to battery. No matter how great a phone is, its camera, its performance, if the battery's dead, it's useless. So with that in mind, Samsung has fitted their device with their largest battery ever, I believe, 5,000 milliamp hours, and Apple has done theirs at 3,969. That obviously sounds like a clear win for Samsung, but I can tell you right now, with Apple's battery optimization, and the fact that Samsung's new display will literally suck battery like a vampire, this is anyone's game, and you're gonna have to wait for the full battery comparison to see the true winner. So do subscribe if you want to see that. It's coming fairly soon. Both phones ship with decent, but not all that impressive chargers out the box. You get a 25-watt charger with the Samsung, and you get an 18 with the iPhone. It's good that the S20 Ultra can theoretically support 45-watt charging. That's very fast, but it's a bit of a shame that when you're buying a phone at this price, you have to pay extra to get a charger that can do that. I also spent some time with the speakers on this new phone, and they're good. Pretty much the same deal as with past Samsung flagships. You've got the main chunk of audio that comes from the bottom firing speaker, but then also through this sliver of an earpiece at the top. I would lean slightly towards the iPhone in terms of overall speaker quality. But then Samsung is leagues ahead in connectivity. For starters, it has a hybrid dual SIM slot by default, which means that you can have one SIM and a micro SD card at the same time, up to an extra terabyte of storage. And 5G. Literally no Apple phone as of now supports 5G, but with the Ultra, you're getting pretty much the most complete package of 5G connectivity. Even for wireless charging, Samsung's phone can wirelessly charge faster than Apple's, and it can reverse wireless charge other phones. That's something that has not yet come to the iPhone 11 Pro. So, bringing this all together, where do we stand? Well, the S20 Ultra is undoubtedly phenomenal. It is so many new and impressive things all at once, but the one thing that will count against it is the fact that for the first time ever, Samsung is more expensive. I don't have the final confirmed prices at the time of filming right now, but I'm told that you can end up paying as much as $200 to $300 more for a Galaxy S20 Ultra over an 11 Pro Max. To be really honest though, I think that's fair game for what you're getting, and it leads me to quite an interesting conclusion. For quite a few years now, my smartphone recommendation has been, if you're on a Samsung phone, buy the latest Samsung. If you're on an iPhone, buy the latest iPhone, because neither company's phones have been so far ahead of the others that it makes sense to go through all the hassle of switching ecosystems. But the S20 Ultra now offers so much more than its iPhone counterpart that for some users this might make sense. Its camera, its display, its storage, we're talking about a phone that can have 1.5 terabytes of data stored on it with a micro SD card slot. It is just a nuts phone. And so what I'm saying is, for the first time, this is a device I can recommend to not just Samsung and Android enthusiasts, but even iPhone ones too. It is that good. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to enter the giveaway, all the rules are in the description. And with that being said, my name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss, I'll catch you in the next one.